Welcome to Oxford Analytica's weekly video. My name's Alison Baily, Oxford Analytica Middle East analyst, and I'm joined in Oxford today by our Middle East expert, Dr Robin Ostle. Today we'll be discussing the outlook for Israeli-Palestinian peace talks as they resume after a gap of 3 years. Robin, why have these peace talks resumed now after such a long break?
I think there are a number of reasons. The first is American pressure. One should remember that during Barack Obama's first period of office, he pushed very hard to get the two parties to engage in peace negotiations. But of course he came up against complete Israeli political intransigence. What's changed now? I think several things. First of all, we now have a new coalition in Israel, new since January this year. And I mean, two of the three major parties in that coalition, that's Hetnua and Yesh Atid, both of them are in favour of a peace settlement with the Palestinians. Likud, which of course is the major party led by the current Prime Minister Netanyahu, is going to find that a lot more difficult. So that has changed. Also, I think that, everything around Israel at the moment is in a state of great insecurity, flux, volatility, whether you look to the north in Syria, whether you look across to Egypt and so forth. And I think that, Israel, like lots of other people, is not at all sure how this is going to sort of work out in the future. And then perhaps they think that perhaps it's not a bad time to start solving, in a sense, the problem on their own doorstep. The great paradox in Israel, of course, is that the majority of the Israeli population actually is in favour of a peace settlement with the Palestinians. Every time they have a national poll, there's more than 50%. Yes, we would like to see a peace settlement. But the paradox is that because of the extraordinary nature of their system of proportional representation, every time they have elections for the Knesset, you get lots and lots of small parties, many of which are, rather extreme right-wing religious parties, who then gain in coalition governments what many people would consider to be, I think, a rather disproportionate influence in terms of, their membership of the population. So that has been the problem hitherto, but now, both in terms of American pressure, in terms of the nature of the Israeli coalition, in terms of the uncertainties surrounding the state of Israel, I think, they feel the time has come. And also, just one last point, Israel, certainly the parties like those led by Tzipi Livni, the current Minister of Justice, are increasing, and indeed lots of Israelis themselves are worried about the erosion of Israel's image on the international stage, through these constant decades of occupation. The EU recently has decreed that there'll be no more aid going from the EU to settlements and other entities which of course are not recognised in international law in the occupied West Bank and so forth. So all these, I think, coming together, that explains really why now, after 3 years, as you so rightly point out, we have yet another round of talks between the Israelis and the Palestinians.
So what do you think this round can achieve, where so many previous years of negotiations have really ended up with very little movement forward?
Well, if they go straight to the really substantial questions that are, I think, going to be at the heart of any peace settlement between these two, namely the exchange of land in terms of peace on the occupied West Bank, within borders roughly as were the borders of 1967, before the Arab-Israeli war in that year, the matter of the status of Jerusalem, which the Israelis want as their sort of sole undivided capital, which the Palestinians also want as a capital, the matter of the right of Palestinian refugees to return to Israel and so forth, the dismantling of settlements and so forth. If if they were to go immediately, I think, into these issues, then I think the talks will go nowhere quickly, as it were. If they're going to meet again in a fortnight's time, having just met in Washington, they're going to meet again in a fortnight's time, either in Israel or in occupied Palestine. If they start talking around these substantive issues, possibly at a lower level, for example, what ought we to be doing about, say, security arrangements in the West Bank? Have they been working well? Are they working badly? How can we improve that? If they start at a very low level initially, almost with confidence-building measures between the two sides, then they may eventually move on to what will be the cruxes of any eventual settlement. But that I don't think is going to happen in the early phases of this particular round of talks. And if it were to happen in the early phases, I think the talks would come to a fairly rapid end, which neither side wishes to see at the moment.
Because US Secretary of State John Kerry has given these talks 9 months to achieve an agreement. That seems quite a sort of ambitious deadline.
Well, I think the history of this particular issue is replete with examples of deadlines that have been set and that have been regularly, of course, pushed back or missed or simply not been operative anymore when things came to an end. If they can get to the end of this initial 9-month period, having agreed some sort of mode of procedure to tackle the really fundamental questions of settlements, land swaps, Jerusalem, and so forth, then we may, as I say, be looking at a somewhat longer and perhaps slightly more successful process than we have seen in the past.
But this is not going to end the wider Arab-Israeli conflict, is it? Because on the Palestinian side, we still have the Palestinian leadership split between the West Bank and between Gaza, and that's not going to change anytime soon.
Again, rather paradoxically, and this is a complete coincidence in a sense of timing, there may be an opportunity now for the Palestinians to bridge some of the divisions that, of course, have been a feature of their politics for the last few years. At the moment, Hamas, the political movement that is in control of Gaza, the whole of what used to be called the Gaza Strip, is in a very difficult situation. It has just lost, as it were, the support of its major ally, the Muslim Brethren in Egypt. The Egyptian army is now sealing fairly effectively the Rafah crossing strip from the Sinai Desert into Gaza. The only other, as it were, outward exit that the Gazans have is into Israel itself. And so, right now, the leadership of Hamas, having, as it were, backed the horse of the Muslim Brethren with their principal ally in the Gulf, Qatar, now finds itself with, really hemmed in and in a very sort of difficult situation. In other words, in a state of extreme weakness. It may be possible in this circumstance for Fatah, the movement, as it were, led by Mahmoud Abbas, the principal power in the West Bank, to achieve some sort of arrangement with Hamas, given that Hamas at the moment, and possibly for the foreseeable future, has not really many other options, as it were. And of course the population of Gaza is probably due for a period of even greater suffering than is usually the case over the next few months, under pressure from the Israelis in the usual way, the very strict control over what goes in and what comes out in terms of people, in terms of goods and so forth, and exactly the same now happening at the Rafah crossing end, leading in and out of the Sinai Desert. The Egyptian army has also destroyed a large number of the tunnels that have been used until very recently to bring both goods and people, often virtually as contraband, into and out of Gaza at that point. So Gaza is now under extreme pressure. This may be an opportunity for Fatah and Hamas to forge more of a sort of more of a working relationship than they've had in the past. Certainly, if it would be very much to the Palestinian advantage if these negotiations are going to proceed further, if there was more of at least a facade of unity, or at least a sort of modus vivendi between the two sides than there's been in recent years.
So there are some signs of progress that is possible here with these talks, but the sort of key issue really is, does it really matter if these talks do ultimately fail?
Well, I think it does, for the following reason, and I think that in the minds of many people, this might well be the last chance that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has to achieve the two-state solution. It's already going to be pretty difficult if you actually look at a map of Israel and the occupied territories, and you look at the absolute mosaic of lands that already have been, as it were, colonized effectively by the Israelis in the form of settlements throughout the West Bank. You look at that map and you scratch your head and think, well, where is the land exactly going to be for this two-state solution on the Palestinian side? I think we're rapidly approaching a point where it's virtually not going to be viable anymore. There are severe divisions of opinion amongst the Palestinians as to whether it's actually worth pursuing a two-state solution anymore. In the absence of a two-state solution, as far as Israel is concerned, the Palestinians are simply going to shift all their focus on, as it were, fighting for their rights inside the state of Greater Israel. And this, I think, would be very much at Israel's disadvantage, to Israel's disadvantage. Many Palestinians think that that's the best way forward for them now. So, as I say, this might be the last chance. This is what the international community wants to see. This is what most sensible Israelis want to see. So, if it is not going to come about, let's say, within this Obama presidency, then it may just not come about at all. And that, I think, would have serious implications.
Thanks very much, Robin. And on that rather sobering note, we'll draw this Oxford Analytica weekly video to a close. You can keep in touch with all our insights on this issue and other global political and economic affairs via our flagship analysis publication, The Daily Brief, and there's more information about that on our website. Thank you and goodbye from Oxford.